Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to start right away because we have a lot of information to share with you. My name is Leora Radetsky, and I'm the Senior Lighting Scientist at the DLC. I'm joined by other DLC staff today, and Casey Holland, Heather Jones, and Lonnie Malapan will be helping me manage attendees and answer your questions. One of our central values is to listen and collaborate with our stakeholders. We had originally planned an in-person DLC Horticulture Summit in June, but obviously the pandemic required a change in plans. Instead, we designed a 3-part virtual series we call Hort Webinar Wednesdays about lighting in controlled environment agriculture, or CEA. Each session features a panel presentation from key stakeholders in CEA, including our utility members. The panel presentations are followed by working discussion sessions where stakeholders like you can share your expertise, insights, and questions about key horticultural lighting challenges. Each panel presentation is recorded and posted on our website for future viewing. Please bear with me if we have any technical challenges today. And the first one is that I can't advance the slides. There we go. Sorry about that. Our panel presentations and a moderated discussion will last for about 75 minutes. During the presentations, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to pose questions to the panel. Or if you'd like to ask your questions, please wait until the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Following the Q&A session, we'll be holding a 40-minute working group discussion on how rebates and regulations can coexist. Many of you have signed up for these discussion sessions, and we look forward to hearing from you. But if you haven't signed up already, it's not too late. Just share your interest, your contact information, and your industry affiliation in the chat box, and we will place you in a working group. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted by Friday on the DLC website. I'll be the MC and moderator for today's session. Today's panelists will highlight their approaches to constraining energy use in CEA and increasing growers' use of energy-efficient lighting. You'll be hearing about energy codes versus regulations, the challenge with meaningfully incenting beyond regulations, and other key challenges and opportunities for market transformation. Allow me to introduce you to our esteemed panel. We have cannabis and horticulture regulators, a utility energy efficiency program administrator, and an advocate for resource-efficient cannabis and CEA cultivation joining us today. I'll introduce them in the order that they are presenting. Derek Smith is Executive Director of Resource Innovation Institute, a nonprofit organization advancing a resource-efficient future for cannabis cultivation and controlled environment agriculture. Tao Chow is an electrical engineer with the California Energy Commission, who works on energy codes in the Efficiency Division's Building Standards Office. Brendan Place is a clean energy engineer with Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. And Lauren Gaikowski is an energy advisor with Franklin Energy. She advises indoor cannabis cultivators and dairy operators in the ComEd territory. Lauren is also a member of our Hort Working Group, a group of DLC member utility representatives who advise us on our technical specifications for horticulture lighting. And I'll give the floor to Derek. Derek, if you could show your screen, I will mute myself.
Good. All right, hello everyone. Thank you to the DLC for hosting this workshop. I'm really excited about getting into the conversation. As Leora said, my name's Derek Smith. I'm Executive Director of Resource Innovation Institute. We're a membership-based nonprofit organization really focused on market transformation in the full controlled environment ag sector. We started about 4 years ago, focused on the most energy-intensive crop, cannabis cultivation, and we'll be branching out from there soon. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about RII and then hopefully do a decent job of setting the table for the discussion that we're going to have today about incentives and regulations. So at RII, go ahead on the next slide. What we do is we bring together stakeholders in this emerging, pretty confusing marketplace to help establish benchmarks and baselines so that we can standardize the data and the language and the metrics that we're using to understand how and how much energy is being used, as well as water and waste and carbon. We help facilitate best practices on subjects like lighting and HVAC and soon automation and controls. And then we also help connect the dots between government actions, utility actions, and cultivator uptake of efficient technologies and techniques. We hosted the first Indoor Ag Energy Solutions Conference in February in San Diego. For those of you who came, it was probably one of your last in-person events in 2020. So on the next slide, you'll see just a number of organizations that we partner with to bring objective information and shared learning in this marketplace. Thanks to DLC for the collaboration. And really the backbone of what we do is our Technical Advisory Council on the next slide, which is comprised of a number of those organizations you just saw. So it's a multidisciplinary body, right, where we've got cultivators, manufacturers, architects, engineers, contractors, utilities, governments, all working together to, again, learn about this fast-moving marketplace and make good decisions and help provide objective information to the marketplace. Next slide. I'll just tell you, we have a number of working groups on our Technical Advisory Council. One of them is a utility working group, and I'll just point out that later this year we'll be publishing, that group will be publishing a program design and market engagement primer covering these subjects in orange. So look out for that, and if you want to get involved in our efforts, we would invite others to join the implementers and utilities that are right now representing about 11 jurisdictions throughout North America. And then the final thing I'll tell you about, which our Technical Advisory Council also helped us pull together, is our Cannabis Power Score benchmarking platform. It's essentially taking information about lighting technology that's used, HVAC technology, actual utility bill information, and other delivered fuels amount information, as well as production information, and we're crunching KPIs on EUI and other metrics so that we can all understand what's going on in these facilities, and also the cultivators can be supported to know how to make their facilities more efficient by getting a comparative ranking. So with all that, I hope that you understand our role in the world. And so as part of bringing objective information in the market, I thought I would help set the table for the conversation we're going to have today, which is really about how governments are responding to this market and the tremendous amount of energy that's being used, and sort of the subjects they're covering, the approaches they're taking, and then the implications that these actions are having in the marketplace, and where we go from here. So this industry, and I'll say cannabis cultivation, but again, more broadly could be applied to CEA, is a uniquely energy intensive industry, and it's emerging. So it's moving very, very quickly, and the technology is really advancing very quickly. And you can see a number of reasons why it's so energy intensive. It's also new and difficult to understand because we're talking about lighting being used for different purposes than helping humans not trip in hallways. And so there's just a lot that we don't know, but governments are feeling a need to act because this market, and again, cannabis in particular, is very disruptive to communities. Denver has seen, as an example of a jurisdiction that's focused very much on building a good climate progress, has seen their climate progress actually knocked down a few steps just from one industry coming in. And sometimes that's impacted because there's not good coordination between the local government and the utilities. And so governments tend to zone these facilities in certain areas of the city. And we hear of infrastructure outages as a result of lack of coordination. And we also see some things like environmental justice issues where these facilities are sited next to freeway interchanges, and other industrial pollutants, and the terpenes coming out of these facilities are mixing with other pollutants and impacting nearby communities of color. And so there are just a host of issues that this industry is bringing up in local communities. And so governments are struggling to figure out what to do and how to act. But on the other hand, they're also seeing that these efficient technologies are proving to save energy. And so they're having confidence in taking some steps to work with cultivators to drive down the energy use. Next slide, please. So states are responding in different ways. Policies and regulations, building energy codes, and cultivator support systems, which I'll describe in a moment. We see the first action on the regulatory front starting in Massachusetts with the Cannabis Control Commission. You'll hear from Brendan at the Department of Energy Resources in terms of their role supporting the commission. But note that you've got a Cannabis Control Commission regulating energy use. In Illinois, we've got a Department of Agriculture regulating energy use. Things they're not used to doing. And then we've got a whole different model in California, which is a more forward-looking model that's through the energy code process, the 3-year process that Tao from CEC will introduce to us. And importantly, what we're noticing is that governments are not just requiring technology and forcing changes in cultivation practices that have been around for a long time, including when this market was illicit or in a medical, barely regulated state. Governments are also investing in cultivator support systems, which we feel are really, really critical because, as others say, you can't just hand a farmer a spaceship like an LED lighting system and expect them to know how to integrate that into their system and be successful in their business or actually achieve the energy savings that you're hoping from that. So they're investing in the promotion of educational programming that can teach cultivators how to, perform at a best practice level and learn from experts. So the next subject I want to just bring or the subjects I want to show you that these governments are addressing range from lighting, and within lighting, you'll see they're presenting watts per square foot approaches, or LPD, also photon efficacy, and in some cases specifying the DLC. They're also requiring HVAC technologies in some cases. Illinois took a step forward on that. We could talk about that. Also requiring some use of renewable energy and reporting on resource consumption. And I think Brendan from Massachusetts will talk about that. We see California working, as I said, on the energy codes, and they are addressing lighting greenhouse envelope and standalone dehumidification. So that gives you a sense of the subject matter. And then the last thing I want to present before we hear from the rest of the speakers is, what are the implications of these actions in the market? So if you go to the next slide, we see there's a lot of complexity here, and that's what we're going to get into in this conversation. Is these government actions are essentially setting new baselines in the market, and what that is meaning in many cases is there's a reduction or an elimination in incentives that were available in that market to help cultivators afford the higher upfront cost of LED technology and other efficiencies. So there's this, as we talked about, this need for cultivator as well as supply chain education. And yet we're also seeing on the positive side, improved operational expenditures, cost of production for cultivators. And importantly, for jurisdictions that are investing in helping their cultivators be more efficient, they're noticing that that's the way that they're going to win when the markets open up and we can ship product between states and countries, because their producer base will be efficient and can compete on that broader stage. And then finally, we're seeing that, especially in Massachusetts, that the program implementers and utilities and program administrators are working more closely with cultivators to look for incentives and savings beyond the typical lighting incentives that would go from an HPS to an LED, because now they have to understand their customer a little bit better. And that's, I think, reaping a lot of rewards throughout the value chain. So I hope that's a reasonable table setting for the conversation we're going to have, and I'm happy to hand it off to the next speaker. And thank you again.
Thank you, Derek. That was excellent. Now we'll have Tao Chow speaking to us about California.
Good morning. So I'm from California. It is morning for us. Again, my name is Tao Chow. I am with the California Energy Commission. So today I want to present to you the new horticultural lighting regulation here in California that we are considering. This is going to be new in addition to what we already have at the moment for 2019 code. And I'll explain that a little bit more. So who are we at the California Energy Commission? The CEC is what we're known for, is leading the state to 100% clean energy future. At the state primary energy policy and planning agency, we play an important role in the whole energy system in California. We invest in energy innovation, we develop renewable portfolio, establish energy efficiency across the board from appliances, existing building, new buildings, and also alteration projects. We prepare for emergency plannings, such as what we recently saw last week, the blackout rollout due to the extreme heat here in California that we experienced. So in 1974, the Warren Output Act established the Energy Commission. We are authorized to develop and maintain the building energy efficiency standards, which then later adopted to become the Energy Code. We are required to update the code periodically, and typically for the last 10 years, we've been on a 3-year cycles. Most importantly, we are required to have codes to be cost effective over the lifetime of the building. So for residential building, the lifetime is defined to be 30 years, whereas the commercial building is defined to be 15 years. The energy code updates are typically driven by the state goals and policies. Currently, we have 2 main current policy drivers. The 2008 CPUC CEC Energy Action Plan requires the state to meet zero net energy for commercial building by 2030. So we need to achieve that goal by the next 3 code cycle. And then we have the B5518 signed by Governor Jerry Brown's. That's an executive order to achieve carbon neutrality. Okay, next, please. Thank you. The Building Energy Efficiency Standard is part of the Title 24, which is the California Building Standard Code. Out of the 12 parts, the CEC is responsible for Part 6, which is the Energy Code. And there's also the Cal Green Part 11, which I will not discuss today. All new constructions, addition, and alteration for residential and commercial buildings must comply with all requirements for envelope, lighting, mechanical, and water heating. So I want to establish an overall picture and framework as why we want to be considering the cannabis sector for this code cycle update. So this chart here comes from Evan Mills' paper. Even though the data here was limited and collected in 2011, which is somewhat outdated now, 9 years, it still provides us an overall comparison of how energy intensive cannabis grow facilities are. So this data shows the energy consumption on average for those facilities is roughly 5,800 kBTU per square feet annually. This number alone exceeds the combination of all the other building types' energy consumption altogether. And so the cannabis for recreational use was legalized beginning in 2018 in California. So as expected here, the cannabis production in California market will continue to grow for the near future. The data here projected out from 2019 on to 2030 is a pretty linear projection. So this is what happens if we make no policy changes to the efficiency measure. This is what would look like. So along with the increased cannabis demand in the market, the energy consumption for this sector will continue to also grow. So this graph here showed the indoor and greenhouse production energy consumption. So this graph and the previous graph that I show are actually part of the 2019 Integrated Energy Policy Report that we adopted back in February of this year. So without additional energy efficiency measure, we project out to be around 9,500 gigawatt hour annually for the cannabis sector in California alone. So this pie chart here also comes from Evan Mill paper. So the lighting, generally speaking, roughly consume about a third of a cannabis grow facility in general. So then we have the next energy consumption, biggest the humidification, cooling is roughly 19%. And then we got CO2 injection, water pump, drying and heating, tore up to the other 11%. So we can see here that the opportunity for improving lighting is significant. And when we look at the entire market for California cannabis production, roughly 89% of the production is done indoor, whereas only 11% is being grown outdoor. So as a state energy policy agency, we need to really address this new challenge coming from the cannabis grow sector and take on the opportunity to improve energy efficiency in the cannabis grow facilities. So for this code cycle update, we are considering mandating horticultural lighting requirement. Once adopted, the code will become effective on January 1st, 2023, and all new constructions, including indoor growing facility and conditioned greenhouse, will need to meet new requirements for the PPE. So for indoor growing, the requirement is 2.1 micromole per joule, whereas the greenhouse would need to be meeting 1.7 micromole joule for the PPE. And for all spaces, time switch controls and multi-level controls are also required for all sizes. So under the current 2019 standards, the cannabis grower facilities and greenhouse already have to comply with mechanical envelope, general lighting, and outdoor lighting requirements. However, under the current code, the horticultural lighting system are exempt. So this newly developed horticultural lighting proposal will replace the exemption with a new requirement. The lighting proposal also applied to additions and alteration effectively also on January 1st, 2023. In general, addition and alteration requirement in our energy code are less stringent than new constructions. So for existing horticultural lighting system, they are allowed a 10% one-to-one change out annually without having to meet all of the new mandates. So, or if a system is being replaced so for someone growing with say HPS at the moment and they want to go to LED, so that is a decrease in the lighting what is used. So they don't have to meet all of the new mandates for these spaces. So the CEC rulemaking process is a transparent and public engaging process. We conduct public workshop for all of the energy code updates to collect public comments and feedbacks on all of the newly proposed changes to the code. For this particular measure, the full code change proposal for the horticultural requirement can be found at the bottom link there under the Control Horticultural Environment Code Change Proposal. This particular workshop for this measure is currently scheduled on September 24th, 2020, so that would be a little less than a month from now. I invite all of the interest parties to participate in this workshop and provide us comment and feedback to help us make an informed policy decisions. And we also already have an open docket, so this is the link that you would use to submit written comments to us. So I encourage you to strongly to take a look at this proposal. There are more than just horticulture lighting in there. We also have the humidification, the dehumidification requirement, and the envelope requirement for greenhouses. And this is not just for cannabis, really the requirement we are putting forward actually apply to all crops. So I look forward to see more participations and hear more from you in the next coming workshop. And that's my presentation, and this is my information if you need to reach out to me for any clarification or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Tao. Really appreciate it. Next, we'll be hearing from Brendan Place. Just let me know when to advance your slides, please.
All right. So my name is Brendan Place. I'm an energy efficiency engineer at Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. My background is in mechanical engineering, and I'm going to talk today about how MASS promotes energy efficiency in the cannabis industry and what specifically DOER has done to support the industry and the Cannabis Control Commission. Next slide. So I'm going to go over some of the background of why we created the regulations and some of our goals, what the regulations and guidance actually are, what DOER has done, and some of the incentives that are available. Next slide. So in 2008, in response to the Paris Climate Accord, Massachusetts passed the Global Warming Solution Act, which required an 80% reduction in emissions for the state by the year 2050. And actually earlier this year, that requirement was increased to net zero by the year 2050. And so this means that all emissions in the state must be net zero by 2050. So reducing any amount of energy use in the Commonwealth will reduce our emissions. And to do this, we're targeting through a suite of different emission reduction policies, all energy sectors, including electricity, transportation, and the building sector. The next slide. And as we know, the cannabis industry, especially cannabis lighting, can have a significant impact on energy usage in areas or in the state. And so the growth of this industry, might have unpredicted energy consumption that leads us away from the Global Warming Solution Act requirements. So ensuring energy efficiency in the cannabis industry will reduce energy consumption growth and limit new emissions in the Commonwealth. Next slide. So what has Massachusetts done to limit this significant increase in emissions? Next slide. So the Cannabis Control Commission was established to, not only regulate energy, but to create standards and processes for the whole industry. And they also created regulations and guidance specifically for energy consumption. And combined, the EEA and DOER collaborated, as well as some other agencies collaborated to provide comments and for the Cannabis Control Commission as they were establishing their regulations, and many of them were adopted. So there's essentially two different pathways that, or there's two different requirements. So there's all cannabis establishments, all marijuana establishments in the state have to follow a set of regulations, and then cultivators have an additional regulations that address lighting, dehumidification, and HVAC systems. Next slide. So for establishments, so all facilities, they must identify opportunities for energy efficiency, which means use of natural lighting or more efficient envelopes, more efficient HVAC systems, and have a plan for implementation. There also must be a consideration of renewable energy opportunities, so solar, or it's pretty much going to be solar, but there could be wind potentially, or maybe a small hydro facility if that's an opportunity. And the facilities must either choose to use these, or they have to explain why they're not going to pursue this opportunity. There also needs to be strategies for reducing demand, so lighting schedules, active load management, or energy storage, and all establishments must engage with Mass Save, or some facilities don't. So Mass Save's the utility program, and some municipalities in the state aren't in those utility territories, so they have to engage with the municipal light plants. Next slide. So I'm not going to read through all this, but just to highlight, so building envelope and HVAC and dehumidification requirements are essentially code level requirements, but horticultural lighting is going to be slightly different, and there's also an exemption strategy that I want to highlight. So next slide. So for lighting compliance pathways, there's essentially a performance and a prescriptive pathway. So you can, so all facilities need to meet this 36 watts per square foot, unless they're a tier 1 or tier 2 facility, which means a tier 1 is 5,000 square foot or less canopy space, and a tier 2 is 5,000 to 10,000 square foot canopy space. And then they can meet 50 watts per square foot, or a project can pursue the horticultural lighting qualified product list, which currently uses DLC's QPL with a 15% improvement on the minimum PPE requirement. And then the other, so facilities can choose to like, they wouldn't be subject to the lighting or HVAC or dehumidification requirements beyond code if they can produce 80% of their on-site energy from renewable or renewable thermal sources. And then additionally, they have to procure credits through as a renewable energy credit or an alternative energy credit to make up the remaining percent to get to 100. Next slide. So what has DOER's done and what has our role been? So DOER has supported the commission as they develop regulations and guidance by offering kind of technical resources for energy efficiency and compliance and benchmarking and producing resources for the commission. So DOER has, expertise in building energy efficiency and has provided support there. Also in the compliance guidance and checklists, we have helped the commission, figure out what to look for as they're going through the compliance guidance checklist and things like that. And then additionally, we have used a grant well, next slide. So additionally, we've used this Innovate grant to partner with ACEEE and RII to produce the Cannabis Power Score, which is the benchmarking agency or benchmarking tool, but also to provide some industry support. So originally this was supposed to be there was supposed to be a workshop series, which turned into a webinar series, which ended at the beginning of this month, where we went over competing and complying through efficiency, cultivating with LED lights and HVAC best practices, where we brought industry experts in and to speak specifically about growing in Massachusetts. And RI has also developed a Massachusetts specific best practice guide, which not only has best practices, but offers some guidance on how to meet some of the requirements for facilities. Next slide. So Massachusetts also has opportunities for cultivators to access incentives. So the Mass Save program, which is the utility-run program, not only offers incentives, but they also offer technical assistance for cultivators and establishments. And again, this is a requirement, so all facilities must engage with Mass Save or their local municipal light plant. And then DOER has programs, so there's a smart solar program, there's a renewable portfolio standard, alternative portfolio standard, and a clean peak standard that establishments and cultivators could access. And finally, I just wanted to present some of the key learning points that we discovered as we went through this process. So coordination, collaboration with many agencies was key to developing the regulations and guidance. The regulations do require some pretty detailed guidance for cultivators and establishments. We found that adding the performance and prescriptive requirements presented multiple pathways for growers, and then enforcement and benchmarking may require some technical support for both the commission and for growers. And thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. That was excellent. Really appreciate the information. And last, but certainly not least, Lauren Gaikowski is going to speak to us about the ComEd program.
Thanks, Leora. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Gaikowski. I am one of the energy advisors working on ComEd's agriculture program, and I also help develop our controlled environment agriculture custom offering, which is the custom program that we developed specific to recreational cultivators. Just a bit of an overview of what we'll talk about in this presentation. I'll give everyone a brief overview of the bill that legalized cannabis in the state of Illinois, and also get into the energy efficiency requirements that were put forth in that bill. Next, we'll get into how we developed our ComEd controlled environment agriculture offering, and how the EE requirements really shaped our program. And then I just want to give everyone an example of what a potential incentive would look like for a recreational customer in ComEd territory. So next slide, please. So before we discuss the House bill that legalized recreational cannabis in Illinois, I just want to say that, you know, I'm not a representative of the Department of Agriculture that is going to be issuing licenses. I had no part in developing these lighting energy efficiency requirements. I'm just here to present the facts as they are and how we at ComEd understand them. So I encourage anyone who is operating in the state to go and read that bill yourselves, just so you have a better understanding and know what the language actually says. So recreational cannabis was legalized as of January 1 this year. The Department of Agriculture is set to award 40 craft grow licenses. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, they've had to push back awarding those licenses, but hopefully within the next coming months, they will get those issued. A lot of the lighting requirements were modeled after the Massachusetts law, so some of the things that we'll talk about will seem very familiar just after hearing Brendan's presentation. But I guess, yeah, let's get into that. So there are two pathways that cultivators need to meet for lighting energy efficiency requirements. So we've kind of termed them Path A and Path B. Path A is going to be cultivators need to meet a 36 watts per square foot maximum lighting power density. And that total square footage in the bill, the term they use is active and growing space canopy. A very ambiguous term, and one that there's a lot of confusion surrounding it, especially when we were developing the program. So we reached out to several regulatory body agencies, as well as the lawmakers who wrote the bill, to get a better understanding of what that meant. And the definitive answer that we came down to is that active and growing space canopy only refers to the flowering space. So those other ancillary growing rooms, you know, vegetative, seedling, and mothering rooms are excluded from these energy efficiency requirements. So that's just a quick overview of Path A. Path B is that all fixtures in that flowering space need to have a PPE that meets or exceeds a 2.2 micromoles per joule baseline, and those fixtures need to be DLC listed. It's interesting that the 2.2 micromoles per joule was the final number that they agreed upon. At the time that this bill was enacted in 2019, the DLC's QPL and minimum PPE was, I believe, 1.9. So just interesting how they came to that number. One other thing that I should mention is that medical cultivators are excluded from these energy efficiency requirements right now. As of 2022, when everyone reapplies for their licenses, these EE requirements will be pertinent to them. So it's a big push for us right now to work with our medical cultivators.
Good, how are you doing? Hang on just a second, let me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so our existing medical cultivators, now is the time to get them to switch from any sort of legacy lighting NHID systems to LEDs, just because the incentives are going to be much, much higher, and so will the energy savings. Next slide, please. So getting into how we developed our custom offering, a lot of what we have designed is really based around the code requirements. That is our new baseline. So we worked really closely with our evaluator and with the engineers over at ComEd to develop this program. It's uncharted territory for a lot of us. So we just want to be very upfront and very apparent with, calculation algorithms that we're using, as well as different assumptions that we need in those algorithms. And that's really helped streamline the process for us. And, when it comes time to reviews, as well as evaluations next year, there's not going to be anything glaringly wrong in the calculations. So you can see we kind of piggybacked off of the Path A and Path B approach. So Path A for calculating an incentive is going to be using the proposed lighting power density. So we'll compare that baseline 36 watts per square foot to the calculated lighting power density for the customer, calculate the energy savings, and then our program for custom lighting projects, we pay out 7 cents per kilowatt hour saved. So pretty standard. What we've seen so far is that most cultivators are still using that 4x4 square foot lighting layout. So, the lighting power densities that we're calculating are, a 1 to 2 watts off of that 36 number. So pretty straightforward calculation there. Path B is a little more ambiguous or a little more murky. So what we do is we take the DLC listing, and from that listing, we'll capture the PPE value and then the photosynthetic photon flux value, or PPF value. And using those two numbers, we're going to back calculate the proposed wattage. And we'll do the same in the baseline scenario, using that 2.2 baseline number. And then we've got a baseline PPF value that's been approved by evaluator. And from there, it's just a very simple lighting energy savings algorithm that we use. So, this is all pertaining to the flowering space, but how do we calculate incentives for the, those ancillary grow spaces? So what we'll do is we'll just take the traditional lighting grower baseline lighting systems and calculate energy savings. So, in a vegetative room and a mothering room, we're going to use a 600 watt metal halide for baseline wattages, and then propagation is a T5 high output fixture. The other thing that we factored in is the interactive cooling savings to the overall energy savings calculation. So that just helps us increase the potential incentive for the customer. And we actually decided to use waste heat factor for cooling rather than the actual cooling system efficiency ratings that the customer will be installing. We just figured that there was going to be too much variability in the market and what customers were going to be installing, and thought this would be a more conservative approach. Next slide, please. So just wanted to give everyone a quick overview of what a potential incentive is going to look like for a customer. And before we dive into this, I want to say that we're going to calculate the incentive for both pathways for every customer. And whatever generates the highest incentive for the customer is the pathway that we will proceed forward with. So, just let's assume we've got a craft grower that's applying for 3,500 square feet of flowering cultivation. In that flowering space, they'll be installing 200 597 watt LED fixtures that are DLC listed. And the DLC listed PPE is 2.68. As well as a ppf of 1600 micromoles per second. So in here, you can kind of just see how drastically different energy savings are going to be, which kind of makes sense. When we look at the proposed watts per square foot, it's only 34 watts square foot. Whereas when we're using that higher PPE value, we're calculating there's a higher delta between the proposed wattage and the baseline wattage. So higher energy savings for us to be claiming, which generates a higher incentive for the customer. This is pretty typical from what we've seen. A lot of folks are going with a higher PPE value, which is just going to generate a higher incentive, which is great. I guess one thing to note though is that when we look at this at a per measure incentive level, it's only $87 a fixture. And when we're talking about fixtures that have over $1,000 materials cost, it's really a drop in the bucket. That being said, every customer that we've worked with through the program is still very interested in pursuing incentives, and I think they understand that the building code regulations are there for a reason, and that reason is to, be as efficient as possible, and we're just driving that point home. So still creating a lot of, equity for the customer in that regard. Next slide, please. So that's just a little bit about our program. If anyone has any other questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is listed here, or you could visit us at commed.com/agriculture for more information. Thanks everyone for your time. I really appreciate it and look forward to the conversations we'll have in the breakout sessions.
Thank you, Lauren. That was excellent. Okay. I think we're going to get started with a Q&A. So we're going to hopefully show all of the presenters' videos and my video. Heather, if you could help me out. Oh, there we go. I've been having some issues with my Zoom controls, so obviously it's pilot error. So we're going to run this. I'm going to ask our panelists some questions first, and we'll have some conversation. And then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. And Casey and Lonnie, I'll ask you if you have questions in the chat box once we are ready for that piece. And we are doing really well on time, so thank you very much, panelists, for keeping to time. Okay, so my first question is for Derek and Lauren, but if the other panelists would like to have a say, please feel free to speak up too. So as we've learned, both in, for example, the case report from CEC, and as Lauren mentioned, HPS, and to a lesser extent, metal halide is still the baseline technology being used in greenhouses and grow houses and sole source indoor farms. What do we need to do to transform these technologies to LED, considering that right now that's our most efficacious source? So Derek, would you like to start first?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. It's an important question. So I think these government regulations help kind of set sideboards on, the restrictions on energy use. And what we need to do is continue to support the market with, I think the DLC standards are incredible because they're addressing not just energy use, but also quality and safety and other things that are important. So, we need to help the market understand the value of LED technology and how it can improve the cultivation environment in a number of different ways, not just energy efficiency, but, again, quality and beyond. So to do that, we really have to work with the cultivators to help them know how to use the technology. This is an industry like a lot of industries, but where word of mouth really matters. I mean, this is an industry that came out of the shadows and didn't share a lot of knowledge. There was no best practice knowledge transfer, right? Everybody's still kind of insular, and every utility hears that every grower, or every investor hears that every grower is the best at what they do. So there's a lot of ego and a lot of behavioral stuff to break through. And so, you know, to create case studies and positive word of mouth, I think we really need to focus to weave all together effective utility programs that engage that market effectively, and paired with regulations and that cultivator support system that we see in Massachusetts.
Great, thank you. Lauren, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess I'd just piggyback off of what Derek said. I think that the need for more studies regarding production increases using LEDs as the sole source lighting is going to be imperative. You know, we've had conversations with growers in Illinois who are applying for recreational licenses who are still planning on growing with HPS fixtures. And when we discussed that, you know, the chances of you getting a license by submitting that lighting design to the Department of Agriculture, it's going to be really slim. They were still dead set on using high pressure sodiums. They just thought that the you know, the production and terpene content value was not there for LEDs. So yeah, I think, you know, spreading the, you know, the benefits of LEDs through word of mouth and also through studies is going to be what transforms the market.
Great. And in fact, you know, that leads me to one of my questions. So I think we should just discuss it now. And Tao, I saw you nodding your head. And Brendan, if you'd like to also participate, I appreciate your comments and your feedback. So, you know, I've seen and I've read, you know, some information that, and you've said it yourself, the growers are concerned about crop growth and concerned about crop quality, right, under LEDs, especially in the literature. You know, certainly there's a lot of information about the incumbents, and unfortunately there's not enough in the literature about cannabis, and there's reasons for that, right, having to do with federal funding and land grant universities that can't work on this, so it's sort of limited. So my question is, if they're used to growing under, say, HPS or metal halide or even fluorescent, right, to start the crops for seedlings, what resources are available to them to address sort of this gap in data? Can each of you share the kind of resources that you provide or where you look to get the, you know, objective information about LED effects?
Is that to Lauren? Oh, go ahead, please.
No worries. So I was just gonna say, as far as the state concern, we really don't have a whole lot of resources at the moment. I would say Derek's group, RII, has the most information out there to address those concerns for LED grow. As far as the regulation going forward, we are planning on, between the adoption of the regulation, which is planning to be June of next year, to be effective in January 2023, we are planning on outreaching and educating growers on different crops, not just cannabis, in order to help them understanding the how to change their methodology and what best practices they could do to improve their production using LED. So I think that's the biggest hurdle right now that we're facing. There aren't enough resources out there as far as what we provide or CDFA providing. So we're working on that.
Great. Derek, did you want to add?
Well, we have our best practices guides that are peer reviewed, and Leora, thanks for your contributions to our how to cultivate with LED lighting. We also have an HVAC one and others that are coming, but and then we have the Power Score to hopefully fill the data gap needs that we all have. And I'll just say that the cultivators, you know, I see this comment about grams per kWh, you know, they really are focused on production. And so that I just want to echo that point, that we need to help them understand how, you know, LEDs require an entirely new growing environment. It requires a complete change in the way that they grow. And we need to help them understand that taking that leap and learning these best practices you know, figuring out how to do the interactive effects right with HVAC, how to adjust nutrients and water and all this stuff will lead to better outcomes for them. But we need to collect a lot more data to actually validate that still. So we all need to work collaboratively. It's just very, very important.
Great.
And I was just going to say, in Massachusetts, we realized that there was a gap not only for us, but for growers. And that's why we partnered with RII, or contracted RII, to help create resources and also to run the webinar series. And we do have growers in Mass that are growing with LEDs, and there are some case studies that they were able to use to present that information.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that, Brendan. We will have some great case studies coming out of Massachusetts, thanks to Brendan's support, Massachusetts leadership.
Were these case studies available for on your site for public review, or?
Yeah, we have cannabispowerscore.org/MA is our Massachusetts landing page. It's where the cultivators can go to report their energy and water usage through the Power Score to the state, but it also has resources for them, the best practices guide that Brendan mentioned, as well as the case studies that are specific to their state.
And then also the webinars are recorded,
Yes.
YouTube clips on RII's YouTube page, so you can watch the recordings there.
Yep. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I definitely want to leave time for our audience to ask questions. I have one more, and then we'll open up to the audience, and if we have some time, I might have one other. This question is specifically for Brendan and Tao. So it seems to me, and based on things that I've read and things that I've heard as well, that there is a risk for cannabis growers to grow illicitly if they feel like they can't meet the regulations in a cost-effective way, right? Either regulations or energy codes. I'm sort of using those terms interchangeably. So is the risk real? Is it a misconception based on the way the regulations are interpreted? And if it is real, what can we do to help these growers grow more cost effectively so that they won't grow illicitly? So Brendan, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think that Massachusetts has a grasp on if this is actually happening yet, especially because the regulations have only recently come into like maturity. So they've been around for a little while, but they're being enforced now. So we don't know if this is happening yet. I mean, I think that I just think about other examples of like there's inertia depending on what people know. And a lot of times that inertia leads people to maintain their same practices, even if there's new technologies and new practices. And it usually takes incentives and experience and other leaders or people that are going to go ahead and do it to prove that it's effective. So I don't really know if an illicit market's going to, or if these growers will grow illicitly, but it's something that we'll have to start looking out for and figure out if we need to, create better resources.
Great. And Tao, I know you're projecting, right? So I'm asking you if you feel comfortable projecting. So we actually currently working with various cannabis grower groups who have come to us with the same concern, actually. The most recent conversation was last week, where we were told that the cannabis growing market, the illicit market, is still making the transition into the legal market. There's only 20% of the current black market is transitioning. And we actually heard their concern that maybe with the new LED requirement, we might actually reverting and stopping the transition from happening. So we're working with them on how we could put forward a policy that makes sense, something that they could implement and comply, and something that are comfortable with. So we're working on that. Hopefully the outcome would be what we could be
meeting energy efficiency goal at the same time, providing them the support they need to go forward with growing LED. Now, right now we are in, almost September of 2020. The energy code is not going to be effective until January 2023. So there's plenty of time for people to actually start learning and figuring out how to adapt to this new growing technology. Just like Derek said, growing with LED require the whole new growing recipes. They have to change the different nutrient, water temperature, their lighting spectrum, all of those factors are important, so maybe in some way we can reach out to them and have the top leaders in those group of people be more working with us more collaboratively to represent their members in some way. I hope that the illicit market concern will not be in 2023.
Thank you.
Could I just add a few things on that?
Of course.
So I would just say that the threat of slippage to the illicit market is a real thing in cannabis, and it's not just because of energy regulations. It's because of a whole host of things. And the California market is cannabis is one of the most regulated, sectors of commerce, period. And many would argue it's generally over-regulated. And in California, the cultivators are dealing with multiple agencies, sometimes with conflicting requirements. And so there's basically the cost of compliance burden needs to outweigh, or if it outweighs the benefits of joining the regulated market, there will be slippage. We've seen that. This is a market that has done this for decades. But what I find interesting is that an HPS grower in California should be psyched with these codes, because they actually don't, if they're an existing facility, they don't need to change to LEDs. They can continue to operate as they are. And in fact, the state is essentially closing the market on HPS cultivation. So their market share, if they do things right, could just continue to increase probably, or at least maintain it steady. And then they can, as Tao showed, slowly take small portions of their cultivation and transition them over time so that they don't trigger a major upgrade and have to switch everything out immediately. So I just think there's workable solutions, and I think there's a lot of fear and concern in the market from cultivators. This is one reason why we published a blog recently trying to lay out what are the real facts and implications and options for cultivators around Title 24 Part 6, so that they can make good decisions now and not just fall prey to the fear of that this is going to, ruin the marketplace. It's going to be challenging, and they need some support. But I do believe that California broadly is going to be minimizing overall regulatory burden, and so these energy regulations, I think, generally are supportive of the California market being hyper efficient, and just like Massachusetts and Illinois, so that they can compete, which is really what the jurisdictions want, is to make sure that they have tax revenue coming from this sector long term, because it's providing a lot of tax benefit right now to a lot of communities that are obviously suffering from tax reductions because of COVID and everything else. So it's complicated.
Great, yeah.
I just want to add one last comment on that, though. The HPS grower actually is at an advantage from an energy bill standpoint, from an operational standpoint. The cost of energy in California is roughly 15 cents per kilowatt hour. That's just a lot higher than the others, rest of the country. In Texas, is only 5 cents versus 15 cents here. So just merely switching from HPS to LED can save them. They can harvest that energy upgrade, that initial investment back in less than 3 years, and that costs they can continue to harvest the saving for many years if they're still playing in operation. So I think for growers to stay low cost and to be more competitive in the market, they need to look at energy solutions to reduce their operation costs and be more profitable in overly regulated market here in California.
Okay, great. So I would like to have some audience questions, and Lonnie or Casey, can you please open up your mics and elevate some of the questions we have from our audience? If we don't get to all of them today, we will answer all of your questions after our webinar is over. If we need to forward them to our panelists, we will do so, so that they'll have the opportunity to answer your questions as well. So let's start. Lonnie or Casey?
It's Lonnie here. We have a number of questions, so I have kind of 5 marked for now, but I'll just start with one and just prompt me for the next when you're ready. But the first question is, does DLC or PUCs or regulators consider loss of grams per kilowatt hour over time causing early disposal of LED lights will increase e-waste?
So I'll take on this piece. The overall policy making for California Title 24, we actually require the environmental impact of all of the new requirement going into effect. And one of the things that we will be considering is this early disposal of LED as well. So it's not just the LED HPS for cannabis growing typically get changed out annually anyway, so that's also get taken into account when we look at the overall environmental impact, the water, saving, the energy usage, and all of those things.
Okay. Next question we have here is, grower power demand is significant. Are any growers participating in utility peak demand management programs? Is it even possible with light integral requirements for most crops?
Brendan, we had a conversation on that. Do you want to take that, or?
I mean, I don't know if there is actual engagement with the PAs yet, with the administrators of our utility incentive program. So I can't really speak to it.
We've seen some of that in some states. I think that it's a demand response, for example, is a difficult thing for growers to consider. It's such a huge financial risk to, take a room down before you plan on it. There's also, employees not necessarily wanting to work overnight and other reasons. These buildings are a little different than others, but these are all things that we need to be exploring and figuring out if there are solutions for them and supporting cultivators to make good decisions.
Guys, if I could raise my hand here, I know I'm just a participant, but my name is Jordan Stouter. If I can add something.
Please.
I am currently the chair of the Boulder County Energy Impact Offset Fund Steering Committee, which is a cannabis-specific related committee within Boulder County. And I'm one of 2 marijuana authorities on that committee. Now, through that committee, we did a couple of different demand side studies on the cultivations within our jurisdiction, both in terms of direct on demand and in terms of the overall energy use of those cultivation facilities. And I'll be happy to share in the chat here a link to those studies and the overall kind of web page, so you guys can look through it and see if that's something that would offer any kind of insight into this conversation. But give me just 1 second, and I'll put that into the chat. But I welcome any questions about that as well.
That's awesome, Jordan. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. And we're thrilled to do a evaluation of your study as compared to the power score research that we've done on greenhouses and the way they use energy. And in particular, actually understanding the carbon footprint differences of based on fuel types used in greenhouses. And we're going to have a feature about your study that we partnered with ERS on in the next Cannabis Business Times coming out in a few days.
Small world.
Awesome work in Boulder.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jordan, we can, when we share the information out, we can make sure that we share that link with all our audience. Right now, the chat is going to the panelists, but we can share that broadly. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay, Lonnie, what else do you have?
Oh, what else do we have here? So we have, why did DLC and ComEd decide to look at total PPF instead of PAR maps, which show how that PPF is actually delivered to the canopy?
Well, DLC didn't didn't have anything to do that. Let's see if we can have Lauren explain why they use PPF instead of PPFD, I believe is the question.
Yeah, so our decision to use PPF really was, we just wanted to take a more pseudo-prescriptive approach, and we were going to be able to do that by just pulling the DLC listed PPF value rather than using the customer's PPFD. It was going to be a more conservative approach rather than, I'm sorry, my cat is being loud. Rather than just using the customer's PPFD value, we figured it would be more conservative by using that approach. And especially when we're just a first year program, we want to be as conservative as possible.
Thank you, Lauren, and we love your cat. Okay, Lonnie, I think you said you had maybe 2 or 3 others.
Yes. So for cannabis growth, would you consider the baseline to be sole source lighting facilities? And if so, how would you treat greenhouses that allow fewer hours of lighting operation and more dimming controls? Besides the reduced PPE requirements I saw in one state, would greenhouses be eligible for utility incentives due to the use of solar energy? And I can repeat that if anyone needs me to.
Lauren, does your program take into account the difference between greenhouses and sole source, or is it all indoor?
This custom express program, if you will, is solely targeted towards indoor growers. There's some security questions and regulations, I should say, in the House bill. So we're anticipating almost 100% of our growers to be indoor cultivators. For greenhouses, we do have, and I guess I should say for greenhouse growers that are growing a more traditional crop, not a federally illicit crop, we have a prescriptive calculation and measure that's 70 cents per watt reduced for LED grow lights. So if a cultivator for the recreational market was growing in a canopy space, we would have to take that fully custom and evaluate it on a case-by-case basis.
So the proposal that we currently consider actually has a single-ended HPS as a baseline, just to answer that baseline part of it. We do consider the supplemental daylighting that the greenhouses would receive. That's why the PPE for those spaces are a little less than that of the indoor facility that are fully relying upon the lighting system.
Brendan, do you know of sort of the mix of how what type of facilities are being licensed in Massachusetts?
In Massachusetts, it's primarily indoor because greenhouses require such a high heating load in the winter, and there's less control over lighting and lighting quality, even though it's natural light. But yeah, I don't think we've had a permitted greenhouse in the state.
Okay. All right, I think we have time for one more, and then we're going to go to our next item on our agenda.
Okay, so this is a question about measure indicator adopted for efficacy. So it says current measures look at PPE, which only consider visible light, while horticultural lighting often needs light energy outside of visible light to perform. the lights outside of visible light being ignored when measuring the power efficacy of horticultural light LED is really a big problem. So I didn't know if anyone could address that, if they kind of see the same thing or.
This was one of my questions too. So thanks for asking it. Yeah, so are you addressing, say, far red or UVA or something like that in some way to address this concern? I don't know who's comfortable speaking about this, maybe Lauren?
Yes, this is Dominic. Yeah, that's energy, like for example, far red is exactly the scenarios that we're talking about. Yeah, some lighting, spectrum we are, catering specifically for flowering stage is actually having more than 10% energy invested, some 15% invested on the far red, and we need to, just trying to figure out, together we need to figure out a way to measure and represent that, correctly when we are addressing the horticultural lighting. It's just not general lighting overall.
Yeah, I can answer that. Our program right now, we're not addressing and factoring in the PAR range of the electromagnetic spectrum. If a cultivator and a manufacturer were to come to us and, kind of bring up that issue, I think what we would do is we would just, again, take that case by case basis and recalculate the wattage with that, the far red spectrum included. If that kind of answers your question. And I think the DLC Horticultural Working Group is actually looking at potentially including those spectrums that are outside of the power range into an overarching value category.
Yeah, stay tuned for that when we do the final in September.
Yeah.
Okay, I think though we have a very tight schedule. I think we're out of time. I do promise that we will make sure we download the chat, and if we weren't able to address your questions directly from Casey or Lonnie, that we will get back to you as soon as possible and make sure we address your questions.